And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Sunday morning's flying weather graphics showing some marginal VFR here covering much of the southwest interior, linking up with some IFR there over the northern Bering Sea. And then with that frontal system out here over those Aleutians and Bering Sea, we've got IFR there down to Adak and Atka, actually by tomorrow morning becoming marginal for Adak, and then some more IFR out towards Shumia and Attu. IFR here, Copper River Basin on down to northeast Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast. And for the afternoon, this area of IFR expands here, covering all of the North Gulf Coast, as well as the southern Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, eastward in toward Yakutat. Stays VFR for the Panhandle interior, good VFR right up to the Arctic coast. Band here of marginal VFR along the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, then back up across Shelikof Strait here into Cook Inlet. And then IFR with that frontal boundary out there over the eastern Aleutians, and IFR also with the main low center there for the western Aleutians. And for Monday morning, got some IFR here over the north central Bering Sea with marginal VFR up to St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, the southern Bering Sea here right into the southwest interior, mostly the Kuskokwim Valley down to Kodiak Island. All marginal VFR extending out to the west here, and then becoming IFR there for Adak and Atka and westward. IFR here across the Kenai Peninsula, right up into Turnagain Arm, Prince William Sound, and across the Copper River Basin with marginal VFR covering much of the southern part of the state here. Yukon Delta, north and northeast, good VFR. VFR for the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, doesn't change there for the Panhandle, staying VFR. A lot of marginal VFR now here south of the Brooks Range in the interior with a couple of bands of IFR here, one along the Alaska Range, the other for the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound. IFR here, southwest Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, then a narrow band up along the, over the eastern Bering Sea there, Pribilof Islands, west side of Nunivak Island, and more IFR over the southwest Bering Sea and western Aleutians. For the passes, Anatuvik and Atigan looking good tomorrow. Both forecast to be VFR on either approach. Same forecast for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, rainy VFR, and for windy, marginal VFR with better conditions on the north entrance. That same pattern holds for Isabel as well. Marginal VFR. And for Mintasta, looks IFR for the day tomorrow and the day Sunday for Tanita. Marginal VFR with IFR for Portage, but Chilkoot and White stay VFR. And for the freezing levels here at the surface, north of St. Matthew Island, but south of St. Lawrence Island, down right along the cutting across the north coast of Bristol Bay, hugging the North Gulf Coast, and then down across the Panhandle, 2,000 feet here over the west central Aleutians. Icing, that big storm out here coming into the western Bering Sea and the Aleutians, quite an area of isolated moderate rime icing here, pushing eastward along the front. Could be some ice or some considerable moderate icing there heading in toward the eastern Aleutians. And then with the remnants of that frontal boundary here farther to the east, got some icing threats there from Nunivak Island down to the Pribilof, the Alaska Peninsula. And then with the moisture here for the North Gulf Coast, possible small area there of considerable moderate rime icing with chance of icing across the Copper River Basin there to the Alaska Range, covering Cook Inlet, south central Alaska, eastward to Yakutat. And from there, looking at the jet stream, low pressure here sliding westward, couple of low centers at 33,000 feet. Got, southeast winds there at about northwest winds at 65 knots there coming across northern Bristol Bay, and about 70 knots over the Copper River Basin, 65 knots in the northern Panhandle. And then with the strong storm coming into the west there, we've got 100 knot southerlies coming into the eastern Aleutians. 9,000 feet, strong low center here over the western Aleutians. West-northwest 60 knots on the south side of that center, and southeast 65 knots on the north side there. Broad area of easterly winds here across the central and northern interior, up to 50 knots here over toward the Seward Peninsula, and 35 to 40 knots Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast. And then westerlies here up to 50 knots there for the Copper River Basin area. And looking at 3,000 feet here, southeast coast, light and variable winds there into the southeast interior. East-southeasterlies here, actually east 40 knots there, Yukon Flats, and then picking up to 60 knots there from Norton Sound up toward Kotzebue Sound there with out of the east-southeast, and then about 30 to 35 knots for the North Slope. And then the big storm out here to the west, we've got 60 knots southeast winds there in advance of that front from the eastern Aleutians up into the central Bering Sea and off to the northwest, and then west-northwest 70 knots staying south of the low center, south of the Aleutians. Turbulence-wise, considerable moderate turbulence here for eastern Aleutians into the western Alaska Peninsula. In fact, all of the Aleutians, much of the southwest Bering Sea, as well as the west coast here in the Bering Strait, down to about the Kuskokwim Delta there, or Kuskokwim Bay, and in the interior, isolated moderate turbulence, maybe a little bit more extensive here for the eastern Alaska Range, and that extending down into the extreme northern panhandle.